Good morning, parish orphans and retrogrades. Timothy Gordon here. I bring you a special show with Mr. Austin Ruse today on his new book on Sophia Institute Press called Under Siege, No Finer Time to Be a Faithful Catholic. I'm pleased to have you on, Austin. We've appeared on other people's shows together, but we've never interviewed one another. It's great to finally meet you in sort of person.
Yep. Likewise, I'm grateful to be on and to finally meet.
It's always a pleasure in this strange Catholic time of ours, which is the topic of your book, Under Siege. No finer time to be a faithful Catholic. There are lots of topical overlaps with my interests and the things I'm writing on currently and I've written on in the past. But first off, would you just tell us why is there no finer a time in Catholic history to be a faithful Catholic?
Well, because the world is going to hell in a handbasket. And what did he do? He sent the likes of you and me. The apostles weren't exactly the A-team, They didn't go to the Harvard of their day. They didn't work for the Google of their day. I mean, maybe Matthew did, because he was so close to the Romans. But for the most part, they were just regular guys that he tapped on the shoulder and say, hey, I've got this thing for you to do. And that is precisely what he has done with all of us. Is we have been chosen. We have been chosen to be here right now at a time when the church is under siege from without and within. Society is the dominant society is against people of faith, and most especially Catholics, and there's a reason for that. So yeah, there's never been a finer time to be a faithful Catholic, because not in spite of all the troubles around us, but precisely because of them.
Why is this such a tricky concept for particularly the Catholic commentariat, Austin, that always tends, far away on the continuum of equivocation, they're either too negative or too positive. I remember, since I've been making videos solo or with others over the last almost 3 years, people would say, you guys are too negative. And I'm like, look, I've been trending away from that. But at the same time, that was right after the Summer of Shame, fall of 2018. You had to be negative because you had to cover the news in the Catholic culture. Now I've absorbed I've absorbed the Francis pontificate and everything it stands for, every proposition for which it stands. And now I'm trying to attempt to formulate what to do. It seems like you're right in that same headspace. You don't want to be too positive. You don't want to be too negative. Why is this so hard for Catholics?
Well, it's hard for Catholics because society is so negative, and there are so many problems within the church. It's hard to get past that. It's hard to get past that and recognize that what a wonderful opportunity to do God's own work. See, in the book, I talk about certain dispositions of personality that prevent people from engaging the present moment. Chief among them actually is distraction. So many people spend their days on these stupid little machines like the one I'm talking to you through, my iPhone, distracted with video games, distracted with following sports, distracted with whatever will drag you happily away from the problems that are all around us. So there's a disposition of personality that prevents people because of distraction. But there's also a lot of people live in nostalgia. Matthew Schmitz at First Things called it golden age thinking. If only I had lived in the Middle Ages, if only I had lived in the 1950s. But now is our time. And then there's the question of fear. A lot of people live in fear. In the first draft of this book, I had 10,000 words on Rod Dreher, and given the give and take with my editor, we cut that down substantially, because I think that Rod denies this, but I think Rod lives in fear. He left New York over fear. He left the church over fear. I read his columns closely in preparation for this book. He thought that we were going to be subsistence farming after Y2K. I never even heard of peak oil. And he was absolutely certain we were going to be living in subsistence farming with peak oil. And the current pandemic was tailor-made for him. because
Right.
he absolutely believed that by this time, right, this year, we would be living in subsistence farming. And he said he would be able to deal with the cancer of his wife better than living in abject poverty and subsistence farming. So I think, and the problem there is that if people live in fear, then they're like Lot's wife. They're afraid and they're unable to move. And like I said, embrace the present moment that God has placed us in.
A couple things, because you opened the Dreher can of worms, and I know you treat of it maybe not to the tune of 10,000 words in your book, but extensively. Why I liken the amenability, the amicability of Catholics in a continual sense after the fall away of former Catholics, particularly to Eastern Orthodoxy. Why are we so friendly? I liken it kind of to conservatives who are too friendly to radical opponents. That they don't extend the same to us. Eastern Orthodox don't extend the same, television spots on EWTN and friendly interviews, softball questions. Why have we done this for Rod Dreher? First off, he's made a bunch of predictions. I'm really glad you brought this up, that we're wrong. The subsistence farmer says that, 2022 is going to turn up all him, subsistence farmer, and it's been wrong answer after wrong answer. So why are Catholics so friendly to Rod Dreher? He's rejected the church. You can't continue to be who you were as a Catholic commentator or whatever after you leave, right? Isn't this just common sense?
Well, this is traditionally what happens. Damon Linker, for instance, who is a columnist for The Week, left the church, officially left the church a few years ago, at the same time that this queer writer named Melinda Selmas left the church. They both left at roughly the same time. And they have essentially stopped commentating on Catholic things. And I think that's probably the right thing to do. You don't really hear from them in our world anymore. Why do we keep hearing from Rod Dreher? I think maybe one of the reasons is because he doesn't come on as a proselytizer for the Eastern Orthodox, although he has recently with Steve Skojec. I honestly don't know. I think that it has a lot to do with the fact that he is such a wonderful writer and right on target with looking at, diagnosing the problem. But you're right. I mean, he left the church. You know what I say about Rod Dreher? Rod Dreher is church haunted. One of the guys that was very important to my conversion back in the 80s was the novelist Anthony Burgess. Most of his novels are about some aspect of the church. He left the church. He was a non-practicing Catholic, but he was church haunted. He couldn't stop thinking and writing about the church. In precisely the same way, Rod Dreher can't stop thinking and writing about the church. Why does he get a platform? I think I honestly think he gets a platform because of his writing on larger societal issues.
Yeah, no, and that's fair. I mean, he's the American conservative in some sense, and so he deserves as wide an audience as he gets. But among Catholics, one just thinks, hey, I mean, we're bringing him on Catholic exclusive, like EWTN, still on the semi-regular, and it to me, it signals a failure to conceptualize and to begin to deal with the idea that we're bleeding because of the crisis in the church. We're bleeding people that actually ostensibly cared. That is to say, people who aren't, left Caths, who are just basically liberals simpliciter. And we don't really care if we lose them. They were never really Catholic in the first place. But a guy like Rod Dreher, for instance, is faithful enough, gets the ideas enough to be lamentable as a loss. And so why consult him on matters of theology? I mean, I think it has to do with the utter inability. I was reading some of Rod Dreher about 3 weeks ago, having this notion. The utter inability to deal with crisis. And I do think it is the most unprecedented crisis in the history of the church. I do. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's an overstatement. And I teach church history. That's one of the classes I teach online. Why is it so hard to just say, okay, look, it's really, really negative. It's the worst it's ever been. But that doesn't mean necessarily that it's end times. Doesn't mean it's not. B, it doesn't mean necessarily that it's non-recoverable, because we've had other really bad crises in the church that were recoverable, maybe a close second. And C, it doesn't mean that we have to, because let's take the church leadership as it is, the episcopate. It's more corrupt in, doctrine, attempted doctrinal corruption, spoliation, than ever before. And that's what makes it number one rank, is that it's not just misbehavior behind the scenes, behind Vatican walls. But still, we can live our lives. It's still okay to have a little bit of fun. I think it's just a lot of Catholics can't conceive of dark times, gallows humor, like dark times. Have a little fun your last night. Have a big meal the night before you go to the electric chair. I mean, don't we need a little more gallows humor and kind of boldness in the face of badness?
Well, that's what my book is about. But a little bit more on Rod Dreher. I mean, one of the surprising things about him coming on to so much Catholic media is he's genuinely anti-Catholic.
Right.
I mean, he has put a big, juicy target on the back of the church, and he wails away at that target as much as he possibly can. And this is one of the reasons that I say that he's church haunted. So yeah, I agree with you. It is an odd thing that he is so feted among certain Catholics. I mean, he's maintained friendships with many Catholics. I mean, gosh, I used to be friends with Rod. I spent time at his apartment in Brooklyn, but before 9/11, he and I parted company over the Long Lent in 2002. I wrote a column later saying that he was right and I was wrong, which I know he was grateful for because he wrote about it. But yeah, he's an interesting case. He's a fascinating figure. He has a lot of followers, and they really listen to him. But as I say in the book, he preaches a kind of fear that will freeze people in their tracks. And back in the Benedict option days, he really was preaching that we should, in the very early days when he was writing columns about the Benedict option, he was really arguing that we should go down to Clear Creek Abbey and build a village around the walls of the monastery there. Now, he changed that over time because, he got so much pushback on that. But still, it's a form of retreat. One of the images that I use in the book, and I know that you have to know this movie, Full Metal Jacket by Stanley Kubrick, where the American soldiers are going in to clear the city of Hue, and they come under fire from a sniper. And the platoon leader, that they call Cowboy, tells people that we have to hunker down behind this wall. And he says, we cannot refuse to accept the situation. And I used to believe that until I saw the movie again, and juxtaposed against what Animal Mother, one of his soldiers, did, strapped on his machine gun and refused to accept the situation, jumped over the wall and charged the sniper's nest. So that's what we do. But I still believe that in many ways, Rod is preaching hunkering down like Cowboy. Now, one of the ironies in the movie is because of his timidity, Cowboy dies and Animal Mother lives. But not everybody is called to charge the sniper's nest like you and I do.
Yeah, but if you don't, here's the point. Then a lot of times those are the guys that die. I don't find it that ironic, right? If you give up, if you lay down, if you quit, then you're going to either leave the church, which is unacceptable. I mean, you can't apostatize, or you're going to accept the conditions in the church as, kosher in some way. And you can't do that. Even though much of this is above our pay grade, we're mere laymen, you still have to, rage against the dying of the light, against the, silent apostasy among the episcopate, whatever you want to call it. So I don't even find it that ironic. What we're doing is, I want to talk to you about the overlap between church and state, because that's a big topic for me, and it's a big topic right now with the post-liberal surge. But maybe, well, let me prefigure that question with this one. What does one do in the state when things have gotten really bad? We're creeping really fast now, not even creeping, toward tyranny, and even the post-liberal right, the populist right, is now basically agreeing with the left that big government's the solution. It's really a terrifying time for a kind of Thomist Aristotelian who understands that small government is the way, and it's a kind of holy small government that we're after. But you can't do the same remedial actions as a son of the church that you can as a citizen, as a denizen of our republic, right? I mean, we can get really active depending on prudence, all the way up to running for office or something in the republic. To be fair to the negative, positive people in the church that get carried away, you can't actually do direct action. There's no real power. The most direct action that a layman can take is actually to gather influence rather than power. So what does your book speak to this difficult situation?
I think your question is, what ought we to do? First of all, I say that none of us may forego this cup, I'm not talking about the fights within the church. I'm talking about the fight in society at large. Some of us, like I said, you and I are taking upon ourselves to charge the sniper's nest. It costs you plenty to do that. It costs you a job to do that. Not everybody can take that kind of heat. But I'll tell you what, there is a school board meeting down the road from me in the coming days in Loudoun County and also in Fairfax County. I'm in Northern Virginia, where they are going to be discussing critical race theory. They're going to be discussing transgenderism, and they're going to take votes on these kind of things. There's a teacher that stood up at the Loudoun County School District board meeting a couple of weeks ago and said that he would not be using the preferred pronouns. And he was immediately put on administrative leave. Some of us are called to go down to the school board and make a speech. Others are called to go down to the school board and shake that guy's hand and give him an attaboy, or to pat somebody on the back who's on the school board who is doing all the right things. I mean, that's a little thing and it's under the radar, but you know what? It means a whole lot. I also argue in the book that people ought to be giving every month to an organization that is doing good work locally, at the State House, internationally, whatever. So not everybody can take the heat that you took and take the blows that you took. I know full well that if I left my day job at CFAM, I would never be able to get a job in business, because all you'd have to do is Google me and see all the things that they say about me and all the positions that I've taken. I certainly couldn't get a confirmable job in the U.S. government. A buddy of mine was up for an ambassadorship a couple of years ago, and Menendez from New Jersey actually asked him, "Do you know a man by the name of Austin Ruse?" and gave him something outrageous that I said, "Do you agree with Mr. Ruse?" So I mean, I haven't taken the blows like you have, but if I stepped away from my day job, I certainly would. So not everybody's called to that, but I'll tell you what, everybody's called to let their neighbors know what they think about these issues, to let their family know about how they feel about these issues, and to speak out, even in soft ways. So there's something really for everybody to do, and nobody can say no.
Yeah, it is one, I don't know, red badge of courage that guys like you and I maybe ought to sort of burnish a little bit more often, because I don't like to brag or anything like that, but something that Milo Yiannopoulos told me after he'd been ubiquitously canceled. When I was checking in with him, "How are you doing, man?" He's like, "Bro, I can't get a job at Foot Locker." And he was like, "It's something to know." It was before the days of TNT on Marshall's channel, where I'd published a book with Milo, and that was about it. But he's like, "This is something to consider as you come out Catholic, come out very far right conservative, come out retrograde. There's no going back." And so your supporters, my supporters of the new Catholic right, which is still shaping up. I'm trying to influence the way the new Catholic right shapes up. I want to beat back some of that postliberalism. They have to consider you're really supporting a good and a holy and a new thing that's sticking its neck out. So I'm glad you said that. Do you have anything? Does your book speak much at all? Maybe not, to the new kind of post-liberalism versus liberalism in the classical sense within Catholicism?
Are you talking about Sarab and Adrian Vermeule and those guys?
Yeah, well, sorry, not a pre-vetted question, but these guys are really on the ascent. Sarab, Adrian Vermeule, Patrick Deneen, the integralists, the post-liberals. It's kind of a frightening thing to see this ascent.
Have you had on, and I commend him to you, Bob Riley?
Yes, Bob and I are good friends, and
Good.
there's distinctions between his position and mine, but I'm much closer to Bob Riley's
Yeah.
point of
Yeah.
view than the guys we just named.
Have you, to digress a little bit further on Bob, have you read his book, Making Gay Okay?
Yes, that's my favorite of all his books, actually.
Wow. You
Yeah,
know, National Review would not review it. First Things would not review it when it came out.
really.
Yeah,
I didn't.
yeah. Because it's so controversial. I mean, he really went out there. I mean, even in conservative Catholic circles, the gay thing increasingly is a third rail. I mean, look at the lack of traction that hero Joe Chambra, gets. In all the amazing work that he does, working directly with gays and putting pressure on bishops and priests not to host LGBT events and things like that. So
Right.
I was in the indult traditionalist movement back in New York many years ago, and the social reign of Christ the King, integralism, was and maybe there are distinctions between the two, but I mean that was something that we talked about all the time. I mean this rise of integralism is not exactly a new thing. It's new to Sarab, it's new to those guys. But it's not new to those who have been in traditionalist circles for very many years. I find that the debate about I find Patrick Deneen's proposition that America was badly founded because it was founded on the Enlightenment to be terribly troubling. And I fear, and I know that whole proposition is teaching a lot of people, a lot of young men especially, to hate their country. And this is a time when our country is being hated by the left. And here come guys from the right who are saying practically the same thing. So I touch on integralism a little bit in the book as one of the distractions that people come across these days. We have enough on our plate without having to discuss and debate integralism. We've got to stay home and take over the school board, for instance.
Right. That's the beauty of subsidiarity. You bloom where you're planted. You can be planted in much worse soil than the United States. Even 2021, even though things are pretty evil, our national regime has supported almost nothing but evil for the last century. But this is my point, and I have debated Patrick Deneen on that precise issue, the genetics of American troubles, and I go further. This is what Catholic Republic, my first book, is all about. America is actually based on the writings of Bellarmine and Aristotle and Thomas, much shockingly more directly than anyone realized. And the Whigs, like Locke and Sidney, they had to plagiarize from these Catholics because their philosophy of nature can't sustain it. And is America, if it is its federal regime, evil and overgrown and outsized now? Of course. Was this how America was planted to be? Absolutely not. And there are court cases, as a matter of fact, that act as a facial proof. One of them, I know you wanted to get to some landmark cases in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. One of them is Everson versus Board of Education, the SCOTUS decision that reversed the meaning of the First Amendment. The reason this is so important is because the First Amendment in 1791, as it was ratified, gave the option for 13 out of the 13 American states to have a right-minded subsidiarian state establishment of religion, an actual integralist state. And 8 of the 13 took advantage of this opportunity and had that. That's what the First Amendment meant. Congress couldn't establish national religion.
A national church,
the states could. People don't even know this. When I was debating Deneen, I'm not even sure if he knew that. He kind of nodded his head when I was like, look, the American regime was beautiful. That's the right-minded thing. The states are the forums of experimentation, like they've been called by countless jurists, and blah, blah, blah. And that was reversed in 1946 when we had 7 of the 9 SCOTUS jurists were actually Freemasons. But the founding of the country was not Enlightenment derivative. It was not even Protestant. It wasn't Freemasonic. It was Catholic in its ideological origin. So this is what I meant. It's more than just a distraction. For me anyway, this is the big danger. We've already lost much of the country to the radical secularists left. now we're losing the right-wing movement and even the Catholic corner of the right-wing movement to guys that are saying that America is evil and they sound like socialists.
You know who's quite good on this topic is Yoram Hazony. Have you read his book on nationalism?
I haven't yet.
I really commend it to you. I mean, he gets some things wrong because he downplays the influence of Catholicism on the American founding, although he recognizes that the American founding goes back to Catholic days in England. But I learned so much from Yoram's book on nationalism and his other books. For instance, he wrote a profound essay now 4 or 5 years ago about conservatism, which I highly recommend to you. It makes one realize that we are conservatives, and as he would say, no kind of liberal, not a classical liberal, not a modern day liberal, but a conservative with roots that go much further back than the Enlightenment. I commend him to you. You should have him on as well. In my book, I make the case that we now have an established church. And I begin it with the 1962 school prayer decision, and then the following decision on Bible reading. And putting aside the rather anodyne prayer that we're talking about in 1962, it was, Almighty God, please send blessings upon our country, our leaders, our teachers, our parents. It was not a really inappropriate prayer, and it was not controversial except for a few families. It went through 13 judges who supported school prayer until it got to the Warren Court, who said that school prayer was unconstitutional. And the following year, they made it unconstitutional to read Bible in school. But the thing about that case is that they then said that the object and purpose of government has to be secular. I commend another book to you called Pagans and Christians in the City by Professor Stephen Smith of the University of San Diego, who I learned so much from that book about the debate in Rome 2,000 years ago and the debate here.
I studied under Professor Smith at the University of San Diego Law. Yeah,
you did not.
Man. Yeah,
He is a hero to me.
Yeah.
During the writing of this book, I found his email address and I was writing back and forth. He's not willing to go as far as I am that there's a new established church. But what he taught me was that prior to 1963, there was a debate going back to the founding of this country between those called the Providentialists and those called the Secularists. And they were almost like political parties. The Providentialists believing that you could see the hand of God in history and in our country, and that this must be taught even to school children. And on the other side, the secularists who say that religion has no part in the public square and certainly not in the schools. Well, in 1963, the Supreme Court came down on the side of that debate and said that the object and purpose of government must be secular. What happened after that? The Griswold decision on contraception, followed almost immediately by the Eisenstadt decision on contraceptives for single people, followed not many years later by Roe v. Wade, Casey, followed not very many years later by decisions on sodomy, making sodomy a constitutional right, and then the granddaddy of Obergefell in 2015. Now, all of these things come, I think, from the Supreme Court determining that all of these things are secular and therefore good, and therefore these are things that we have to enforce. Now, all of these things are then percolated down through the Department of Justice, the Department of Education, and on down to a little public school near you and me, where they are teaching children new religious dogma. Sex is assigned at birth. You can be born in the wrong body. Boys can be girls. Girls can be boys. Homosexuality is inborn and unchangeable. These are religious teachings and not teachings of science. And so this is the new established church that I claim, although Smith disagrees that it hasn't gone quite that far.
Yeah. You're saying it's like a national establishment of religion. He's actually one of the two Smiths at the University of San Diego School of Law that recommended to me a life-changing book. It basically comprises all of chapter 4 of my book, Catholic Republic, called Separation of Church and State, the famous Philip Hamburger book. It was Tom Smith and Steve Smith that both told me, in this religion and constitution course, you need to read Hamburger. His interests are your interests. We're originally, it's fascinating. the idea in 1792, right after the Bill of Rights was codified, that to say that an American, legislator or someone like that wanted to separate church and the one of the 13 states, wanted to disestablish religion from one of the 8 of 13 places, or the ability to have an official state religion. This came as an accusation. That's the first chapter in that book that Steve Smith made such a big deal about when he was teaching me. It came as an accusation, not as a laudatory thing. They were not really brainwashed, but their set of assumptions were 180 degrees the opposite to ours, because they lived in a pre-1946 Everson versus Board of Ed United States of America. Before 1946, everyone read the First Amendment, that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. And I do agree with your thesis, by the way. And that meant the state legislatures, the 13 or 50 several legislatures, can do any of those things in the first 8 amendments, the Bill of Rights. The National Congress cannot. That's what everyone knew before this, malappropriated 14th Amendment doctrine of incorporation. Yeah. But now, so what you're saying that's actually amazing is, not only is it unjust that the states can't make an establishment of religion as they're supposed to be able to, whereas the federal government could, but now you're saying they're fully swapped. The federal government is actually directly contravening the First Amendment, and they have a state church, and it's basically secular humanism. Am I right?
Do you know who the priesthood are? Anyone who wears a robe.
Right.
Lawyers, academics, and scientists. And this is where the new faithful go for their teachings and for their encyclicals. Catastrophic man-made global warming is now an article of faith. So they believe it because it came from academics and scientists. By the way, a slight digression. Do you know that Stephen Smith's daughter is Rachel Liu?
No, really? I didn't know that.
The look on your face is exactly the look on my face when I discovered that. Rachel Liu, the Catholic writer, was raised Mormon. That's her dad.
Yeah, I knew he was Mormon, and I knew he knew that I was building the case for my book, Catholic Republic, there in law school, and he was in this Religion and the Constitution course. He pointed me in the right directions for some helpful arguments, but he was not sympathetic because he's a Mormon. I didn't know that. That's
Isn't that remarkable?
Yeah, you blew my mind.
Yes. Right, as was mine blown when I found that out from Rachel and some social media exchange.
That's wild.
Yes.
So she converted.
She converted and converted into the fraternity of St. Peter. So she and her husband and her children have been involved in the fraternity now since their conversion. I don't know precisely where they are right now, but they have been traditionalists.
Huh. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
She's got to be around my age, maybe even younger. That's crazy.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, did
I stop you right in your tracks?
Did I sum you up right? Or
oh, absolutely. That's my argument. I would urge you to read my book and respond, because I think that you're probably more learned on this subject than I am. But I would say that there are two kind of original parts of my argument. One is that there's an established church, and the other is that we are living through one of the most remarkable times that the church has ever known, where the world is absolutely obsessed with us. And this comes from a speech that I've given now for 7 or 8 years. This book came out of a speech that I've been giving for many years called No Finer Time to Be a Faithful Catholic. And I start my argument for this, that the world is obsessed with us. The world can't get enough of us. With the long Lent of 2002. Within 2 years of the long Lent in 2002, what happened? What I'm going to say is a whole bunch of things cascaded on top of each other in a matter of a few years. And you have to see them all together. So 2002, the long Lent, which we deserved. And we have to be glad that it happened, because this had to be exposed. But in 2004, John Kerry ran for president. And what was the topic of national debate then? The proper reception of the Eucharist. We've never seen anything like that in our lives. In 2005, what happened was the release of Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ. I was in a New York hotel room that Ash Wednesday when it was released. Every single talking head was talking about the Passion of our Lord. It was a global event that sent people to confession, it literally sent people to magistrates to confess crimes that they had committed years earlier. That's how phenomenal that event was. And then right after that was the beginning of the final sickness of JP2, then his death, then his funeral, the rise of Benedict, then his abdication, the rise of Francis, the national debate over healthcare, where the Catholic teaching on abortion was at the very center of that debate. So, and now Francis can't ride on an airplane without his, side comments making global news. My point, part of my point is that we are living through a time when the world is absolutely obsessed with us, can't get enough of us. And this has to tell us something good.
Yeah, it's very telling. I'm not sure what it's telling about, because think about news media in the US has always borne this strange ambivalence with regard to us, the Catholics, the one true faith. Entertainment media, I mean, think of like The Godfather. Think of all the trappings of Catholicism there. It's superficial, but it's a beautiful background, the particularly the old church. And yeah, now as you note, Austin, the global media apparatus, largely because Francis is a globalist, and in some sense he's kind of the leader of the globalist movement. But nevertheless, it is very telling, and it shows that even the brainwashed, the badly brainwashed apparatchiks of the other side have a nose for, have a kind of intuition machine, tabulating machine for this is the one true faith. They're not hounding the Mormons or any of the 39,000 Protestant congregations. It's clear that the big game lies in the church. And I'll let you bring us out maybe on this note. The big game lies in the church. The fate of the world hangs with the church, and its crises are the world's crises. Its victories, though they won't receive it this way, are the world's victories. And so what a beautiful time to be a Catholic.
Yeah. To a couple of things. Lenny Bruce, no less than Lenny Bruce, one time said, "There is only one, the church." Isn't that great?
That's
so when
great.
People talk about the church, there's only one, the church. So it is truly a remarkable time to be a faithful Catholic. When we pray the Hail Mary, we pray for us now and at the hour of our death. These two moments. We cannot yearn for the past. We cannot be so discombobulated about the future. We have to be concerned about the present moment that God has placed us in, and the moment of our death. And I implore people in this book, do not miss this remarkable time.
Beautiful. Yeah, I love it. I use the internet term LARPing, live action role playing. I'm a Latin Mass loving Catholic, but guess what, folks? The Latin Mass, unlike contrary to what a lot of the talking heads out there on Catholic YouTube are saying, it will not solve all our problems. The French Revolution happened under the Latin Mass. All of the tragedies of the 19th century and the early 20th century happened under the Latin Mass. And guess what? The infiltration of the church, which really began in the 19th century, for 100 years wound its way toward Vatican II under the careful governance of, liturgically speaking, the Latin Mass. So this is not the one thing. The one solution to our problems is not in the past. It is sacramental, like the sacraments. It is in the past, present, and future. And that's why I always like whatever I hear from you, Austin. You're always quick to emphasize that. It's the past, present, and future. And we are thrown in these times. Be grateful where you can. Don't be over grateful. You don't want to be one of these optimists. There's a lot of negative, but we have to deal with the negative here. And we're equipped with the apparati to do so as faithful Roman Catholics. Am I right?
The French revolutionaries knew who the enemy was. They went after the church and the family, who were both divinely instituted, and they are the enemy now. That's what people have to understand. I also say in the book, there are halos hanging from the lowest branches of the trees. All you have to do is reach up and grab one, but you have to reach up and grab one. Do something.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, so one way that I'm trying to help people do this real quick before we get out of here is on my site, timothyjgordon.com. I'm encouraging people to homeschool their kids.
Yeah.
The Retrograde Classical Academy online will be offering, instead of 2 courses like I tried out doing per semester this past year, 7 or 8 courses, and many of them are homeschooling centered. Things like introduction to Latin, introduction to algebra, things like that. People need to homeschool their kids and take accountability for this. You can do this by going and clicking on the appropriate tab at timothyjgordon.com. They can also read your fine new book. Can you tell people in a parting shot, where can they find your book? Who's the publisher? And, give us one more kicker line.
The publisher is Sophia Institute Press under the Crisis imprint. They can find it at the Sophia Institute Press website, also Amazon. It was #1 for a month in Catholic new releases on Amazon. It was number one. It was #1 for a while in Christian apologetics. So it's doing well. People can get it at Amazon. They can get it at Barnes and Noble. They can get it at Sophia Institute Press. There's good news all around us, folks. And the greatest news of all is he sent us here right now.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And congratulations, Austin. It's I'm going to sit down and read it now that I have some time in the slower dog days of summer. One other thing, people, this is not church specific. This is Republic specific. Go to realestateforlife.org. I realize everyone's moving now and it's driving moving costs up. But if you contact realestateforlife.org, if you do want to get from the bluest of the blue states to the reddest of the red, like I did, it's still a good time to do so. Go to realestateforlife.org and someone there will help you. Austin, we got to get out of here. Thanks for doing this interview impromptu. It was great. And I look forward to picking up your book soon.
Thank you so much. It's been a great pleasure.
God bless you.